What's up, YouTube? It's Jackson Man with Team on the Grind, and today we have a tier list video post YCS Niagara. Today we're going to go over the decks that I think are can actually win events and top them. Obviously, there are outliers of random decks, but I'd rather not do a video where I go over every single deck that is ever placed in any kind of event because I'd rather not go over Gravekeeper, Six Sams, stuff that while yes can do well, I don't think will be winning premier events like Ultimate Time Wizards or RBTs. So first off, I want to go over the Fishborg Blaster Dream Frogs. I think this deck is a tier 2 deck. Obviously, throughout the video, I'm going to be moving decks around to where I think some are higher than others. But generally, rule of thumb, all decks can move generally within their tier, but I don't think most decks, they might, like, the top of tier 2 might be the bottom of tier 1, but I think this deck is really good and really powerful into the format. Clearly it won nationals, so the deck is very well. And I also know it won another major event. This deck's really good. Power of it is just how all frogs decks are good, but it also just allows you to dupe block multiple times per game. Like I've heard of someone who dupe blocked 3 or 4 times in a single game, and that's just really powerful because most decks can't out multiple dupe blocks, let alone 3 to 4 of them. And this deck can just OTK you through the Colossal Fighter Armory Arm OTK, or it can just beat you down by regular Monarchs, which is really, really good. Next up is Blackwings. In my opinion, this is the best deck in Edison format. I don't think it's by a large margin, but this deck is just very powerful. Whirlwind Shura turn 1 plus real back row into not heavy storm is just is such a powerful start. It has so much comeback potential with Whirlwind, Dad, Blizzard is just a hell of a normal summon because it allows you to basically make any level 5 or level 6 synchro. Besides obviously specific ones that are not so generic. This deck's just really good. Clute's a very, very good card. Gale's very good. Being able to access value off of Shura is really good. It has a lot of combo lines. It's very consistent. It has a very high ceiling, but also a very good floor. So players getting into the game, I tell them to play Blackwings because even if starting out, the deck is very good and will help you get into Edison, and even the top level players still have trouble with Blackwings, like making it to the best of its ability, because the deck is very hard at the highest level, but it's also very easy at the lowest level. Meaning that like you could play this deck for the end of from the beginning of your Edison career to the end, and like you would progressively get better. And there's not much other decks that will like his deck is so strong and just very good. Got second at this last year Nationals with HT19. We are still very proud of him for that. This deck just puts up consistent tops. Wins a lot of smaller events. The deck is just so good and very powerful. Next, we're using Cestalis to represent a regular Frog Monarch. I think this deck is a tier 2 deck. It's just very strong. It does what every Frog Monarch does from End of Time. It just kaises you, rises you, Cestalos you. Sometimes they'll lad you. And lad for Light and Darkness Dragon for the people that don't know the abbreviations. It's just a very good card and allows you to beat a lot of matchups that aren't value and frogs because they'll actually have to use real cards to out it. This card is just very consistent because all you need is a couple monarchs plus a weighted treeborn frog, and you're just off to the races, getting free +1s. Some of the downsides of this deck is that it does lose very heavily to Mask of Restrict, but that card is very not in every side deck because a lot of decks like to play Caius, which is kind of the overlord of the format. And the deck's just very consistent, very good. Has its problems, but every deck has its problems in Edison format. I don't think any deck is actually perfect in Edison format because every deck has its problems. Sometimes it's consistency, sometimes you just have big weaknesses, and it's just like that. We're gonna skip this for now. This is Fitz Dragon. I think this is considered rogue. It's the Flip Dragons, which Fitz has been very popular with it. I'm not denying that Fitz with this deck. If Fitz is playing it, it's a tier 1 deck. I'm not denying that. He's a very good player. Definitely a tier 1 deck. But for everyone else, I've not seen anyone else have the success that he has had. So I'm putting the deck down here. It might be bottom of tier 3, but I consider it rogue because it's not really seeing a lot of play. And the deck, don't get me wrong, very strong, very good, but I just think it's down here. Next is GBs. More going or less the list that won RBT New York and the guy who went undefeated in Swiss. The deck's very good. I think it's bottom of tier two or lower end of tier two. Purely because I think that GBs on its own, if you're playing the guy who won the entire list, I've been playing that deck and a version of it for the last month or so, and I've just had many problems where like I would go against one of my easier matchups like Frog Monarch, which I do think is an better matchup for Gladiator Beast, and like 5 turns in a row, I would just not see a monster. Any monster, I'd win the game, but I just don't see one. So playing a low monster count is very unfortunate because then you just have times where you just don't see a monster and you just lose because of it. And the lists that play way more monsters, you either brick on like Test Tiger, Secutor, or you just don't see enough back row to protect your normal summon. So while you have like 3 GBs in hand, you just have no way to protect it, and you just lose to like a Sirocco, a Caius, an Armed Wing, and like you just get beat down by just stronger monsters. Next up, this is the Frog Hero list. I think this is definitely a tier 1 deck. I think this deck is very strong. It's very powerful. Very well-known players have played it and won major events with it. I think that the deck sometimes deals with consistency because I've seen multiple Frog Hero players where they will open like 2 Miracle Fusions but never see a hero. Well, they'll go like Stratos Effect, get Bottomless. Their next hero will get like Deep Prison, and then they can never stick a hero to make the absolute zero. But that just happens very seldomly. But there is times to where this deck can deal with consistency issues, where you'll see part of the deck but not other parts, or like you'll see the hero package but in the monarchs but you won't see frogs, or you'll see frogs and monarchs but you won't see heroes. Your Miracle Fusions are dead, and it's just like you're playing 3 different like mini engines, and sometimes you don't see all 3 and they don't meld well. But there's a reason why this deck keeps winning. It keeps topping. It's just so consistent. The dupe block is very strong. You have constant Caiuses and Rises. You can swap Frog, bounce to Caius for a Monarch next turn. The deck's just very, very good. And the fact that this deck doesn't just auto lose to like pulling the rug and like Mask and Restrict like most Frog decks do, because of the hero package, is really strong and really helps it. And the Ab Zero allows it to just push through a lot of boards and deal with a lot of floodgates. Next up is Dragon Turbo. I think this deck is like a tier 2, top of tier 3 deck. The reason being is I'm not denying that its strength. This deck is very, very strong. It's just that it just does like it either wins the event or it just does not top. I've rarely ever seen any Dragon Turbo players not make finals, and like they're like, yeah, we made top 8, and it's just like unlike these other decks where they're like this deck will have multiples in top 8, multiples in top 8, couple in top 8. These are now even getting like 1 to 2 in top almost every top 8. This just won an event, and there was a guy in top 16 and another one in top 8. This deck is just like I'm either winning the event or I'm nowhere near top cut, and I'm like I cannot like this is very much a casino deck, and I just cannot put a deck to where it's either winning the event or going like X3 drop like early on in like a tier 1 status or even a top of tier 2 status, purely because like it is either your day and you are just beating. Because I think this deck, if it never bricks, is probably the best deck in the format, because like the deck is so insane, it does so much, and it just wins every game. But like this deck, a lot of times you're just not doing the hard combo, the draw 25 cards in a turn. Like you might super redraw for 1, and like it just feels so unfortunate, and that's why I have to put this here. Skyscraper, we're gonna put this. Skyscraper represents the pure light hero beat deck. The one with Thunder King, Gold, DD Warrior Lady, the one who's like barely playing Miracle Fusion, if at all. I think the deck is very strong. I keep losing to it at locals, but that isn't really why I'm putting it here. The deck is very strong. The Skyscraper is a very good card because it allows you to just beat over bigger monsters. But like the deck doesn't have the high ceiling of like the Diva Hero beat list, because it just doesn't do well into it. Just like the ceiling of it is very low. The consistency is very high, but like it doesn't deal with big monsters. Without Skyscraper, if they out your Skyscraper, you just have a problem with big monsters, and I'm just not a fan of that. And like there's a lot like you just don't. You're relying on your normal summon so much. Next up is Gemini Rogue. This deck was very strong a year ago. It put up top 8 at Nats, it top 8 another event. but this deck is just very much fallen off. I still think it's good, but like I just don't think this deck can actually compete with the top list. I think everyone's now discovered how this deck works. You save the Deep Prison for this guy. You save the Bottomless for their Giga Plan and all that. I feel like this deck was very, very good back when no one knew how to play against it, no one knew how to side for it. But like now that everyone knows kind of how this deck works, like you can just easily beat it. Next up, we have Christia Sworn. I think this is a tier 3 deck. I'm going to be very not as lenient with some decks. I know a lot of people put a lot of decks in a lot of tiers, and I'm going to be very more strict on what I put in higher tiers. Because I see a lot of people who put a lot in tier 1 and a lot of tier 2. But anyway, back to the actual deck. The deck is very strong. I think it just won YCS Niagara. But like this deck is very inconsistent. If you don't mill, loses hard to Light Imprisoning Mirror. You play a lot of boss monsters like Soul Imperial Light. You have Christia, you have JD, and like there's just so many hands to where like if you're not milling at all at the beginning, like you're just not doing anything. There's a lot of bricks in the deck, and even if you're not completely bricking, if you're not milling a lot, like you're just not pushing a lot of damage in, and you're not putting a lot of pressure on. And like this deck just can lose to itself more than it loses to your opponent sometimes. Don't get me wrong, the ceiling on this deck is astronomical because like if you go JD, blow up board, summon Christia, like that is just such a strong play. Like you have a thing that can blow up the board if ever needed, and a monster that just says your opponent can't special summon. Generally, you've also added back an Honest, so you can Honest over anything in case they have like Shura Kalut with like this deck, and you can still like keep your whole board. But like this deck, the consistency problems is the reason why I have it down this low. If it again, this deck, like this deck, if it could just be 100% consistent, would definitely be like up here, if not up here. But with how the consistency is, I have it down here. Value, I think it's the second best deck of the format. This is probably one of the best, if not the best, Dark Arm deck, because at any point in the game, as long as you don't have a lot of Greffers, Armageddon Knights, Caius's in grave, like you can just manipulate your grave no matter what with Dark Arm. You have Burial, you have Return. Greffer Value is a very good play. Even Armageddon Knights send Necrogarna is very strong because then your opponent has to think of, oh, does he have Plague in hand to make a level 6 Roar? Or is he going to Caius me? Like, this deck is just very strong. There's a reason why it keeps topping and it keeps winning. This deck is very consistent. It does the same thing over and over again, but like that thing over and over again is just consistent, kind of low to the ground, but can also like just high roll you into Burial or Return or Dark Arm. And like those cards are absolutely insane. They're probably 3 of the best cards in the actual format. So like this deck is, there's a reason why this deck keeps winning. There's a reason why it keeps topping. There was a time where people thought the deck was falling off around Nationals format, and then it ended up putting, I think, 2 to 3 in top 8 in the very next event. There's a reason why this deck is still so prominent and doing so well. So that's why we have this deck all the way up here. The deck's very strong. I don't see it falling off anytime soon, and I still think it's very much up here. Next up, we have the Machina Lightsworn deck. I think it's top at tier 3. The only reason I'm putting it this low instead of tier 2 is because I don't think enough people play it. And generally, rule of thumb, if you're up here, actually, like that, you want a nice, I think you want a nice YCS Niagara. And for that, I'm going to put you above this. And for other reasons. But this deck is very consistent. It's very good. But like, it loses to Cyber Dragon. And Cyber Dragon is now being put back in every side deck. A lot of decks are now still putting the Chimera Tech in their extra deck, where some decks were cutting it before. And this deck is, while very good, it can lose hard to a DD Crow and a Pat of Avarice. And like, you are basically value, but you don't have a dad. You don't have a return. Your return is Pot of Avarice, but while that is a gamble on what you're drawing off the 2 and re-establishing resources, this deck can just OTK you or put up like an insane board, while this deck's insane push is like Gear Frame Fortress, which is very good, don't get me wrong. And that's one of the best turn 1 plays for most decks, for at least damage-wise and kind of board presence. But this deck just has a problem with like, I don't know, it's just not seeing a lot of play. And Cyber Dragon is a huge reason for it, and I kind of get it. And so that's why I'm putting it in tier 3. The deck is very good. No deck I have here I think is actually a bad deck. I think they're all very good decks, where if you look at most people tier list, all of these decks would probably be in tier 2 or above, except for probably this, but I'll talk about that later. Next, we have regular Disaster Dragon. I think that deck is actually a tier 3 deck. As someone who has started with that deck and moved, actually, you can go right there. I think this deck is very strong. It's very good. I'm basing this off of the E3 list. with the DD Warrior Lady, Totem Dragon, White Knight Dragon, and Mass Dragon. I think the deck is very strong. Don't get me wrong. It's what I started with. But I feel like the deck very much can lose to Spirit Reaper. It can lose to Duplock. And like, while yes, you do have DD Warrior Lady, that loses to Bottomless, that loses to D Prison, Mirror Force. And like, while yes, also the deck that I made does lose to those things well. I think that my list is just this deck, but just improved. And you can argue that in the comments. I'm not saying that my list is perfect. I'm not saying it's the best dragon deck ever made. I'm just saying that I think it is just this deck, but just made slightly better. And I think that if you think that it's different and you think DD Whirly is just better, that's very fair, and I completely understand. And I would love to see those lists, and please play it at events. I don't think this deck is very played much, which I think is very interesting, because Quackmiro Drago is very good. If you look at these lists, besides this, because this only stops like Gores and Battle Fader, but like these two lists, if you just drop a Quackmiro Drago and protect it like nonstop, these decks have a real problem dealing with Quackmiro Drago. Blackwings do have Kalute, but like they only have 3 Kalutes, and if they don't have Whirlwind, they have to hard draw it. So like you gotta put them on, gotta have it sometimes. And like if you can recur the Drago back, it's really good into like the top decks. A lot of the problem with dragons is the not top decks. Like this matchup ain't great. This matchup ain't great. This matchup ain't great. And some decks down here, like these matchups is just not great for any dragon list because like Quackmiro Drago does nothing against it. So I think the deck is very good, but like I just think that there are better versions of it. Next up is X-Saber, Rogue. Have to put this for my teammate Flash of Blades. He plays it nonstop. And then there's also Totegon who tops with it. But like no one plays this deck. It doesn't have a lot of Ultimate Time Wizard. It has like no Ultimate Time Wizard tops, no RBT tops, no Deck Devi tops. Like someone needs to top a real event for me to move this up. But right now, I just think it's down here. It just has no premier tops in this format. Obviously, next format, this deck is insane, but we're not in that format. This is Chaos Fairy. I'm gonna put it right here. Problem with this deck is I think it's a one-note deck of just Christia and that's it. I think this deck is just inherently better than it. The strengths are that you do have Chaos Orc, you do have Battle Fader, you have Royal Decree, usually in the main, if not you're siding it, which I think it should be main decked. This deck is very good. Orange Light is one of the only hand traps that's actually what we consider hand traps, like DD Crow, and not just battle hand traps, like Gores, Battle Fader, Trag. I'm thinking of like actual hand traps, how you think it in the modern day. This deck's very good, but like the problem with it, I think, is just like the deck relies very heavily on normal summon without Christia, and I'm like, I just don't think it is better than this version. And that's my opinion. If you think that's different, that's completely fair and balanced, and I have no problem with that. I just think that this deck, it started off very well, and it's just fallen off since then. Next is Diva Hero. I consider it the top of, actually, no, we'll do this, and we'll do that. I know of a couple players near me who do very well with this deck, and they have since moved on from the deck. I don't know if it's just because of the meta or if they think the deck is not that great. I just don't think the deck is all that great right now. I just think it is a worse value turbo. There is a lot of bricks in this deck. It can OTK you out of nowhere, don't get me wrong, but I just think that there are other decks that do that better. There's too many bricks, and I just don't think it fares well into the meta. Next is Hero Beat. Probably right there. And the only reason why I don't have it over GBs is because it's done very well recently. This deck is just like, I think this deck is the boogeyman of the format and the gatekeeper to a lot of decks, because this deck has a great matchup into a lot of decks like this one, and I think almost every Dragon list Hero Beat just beats. But like this deck, and I'm thinking of the Diva Hero Beat list with Diva Hero, or with Deep Sea Diva. This deck is just very good. It's very low to the ground. It's very consistent. It'll do the same thing every game. It's going to drop an Alias on you and Gemini Spark you, and then Miracle Fusion you later, and Deep Sea Diva into level 5 Synchros, and just beat you down with a good statted vanilla. But like that vanilla is backed up by Gemini Spark and Honest and Hero Blast and Deep Prism. And like the deck is always going to have a lot of back row, and they don't need to do a lot of plays because they're one monster. If they open Gemini Spark Hero Blast, so Gemini Spark one card, and then Hero Blast another, and then normal summon the Alias and beat over another, so they just beat over 3 cards. And like this deck is very resilient. The problem with it is that the ceiling is not very high. It doesn't have a lot of big pushes. In simplified game states, this deck is very, very good, and like that's how this deck wants to work. But I just feel like, and a lot of people don't like playing it because a lot of people don't like the playstyle of it, and it just doesn't seem fun to them. And I completely understand that. This deck, I am putting it at top of tier 3 purely for the reason of it is not being played a lot, because this card alone I want to say is $70 to $80 each, and a lot of people just do not want to spend that kind of money for a card. If it was more accessible, I'd probably put it up here. But right now I put it down here just for the amount of people actually playing it. This card's very strong. It is very annoying. Multiple Titanials is a problem for certain decks. And just a burn effect of if this attacks directly and actually connects, that is 3,000 damage, which is not nothing, and is very strong. Next up, we have Quick Draw. I think it's the top of Rogue. I think this deck is very good. I've lost to it in the finals. I've played against it in another finals. I think the deck is very strong. I just don't think it's very well into an oppression metagame, where like this deck's playing oppression, this deck's playing oppression. Not many other oppression decks. But like with these two being like a large portion of your meta game, because these two are going to be everywhere, like dealing with oppression is very hard for this deck. This deck loses very hard to deck heavy, and like this is maining deck heavy. This is maining deck heavy. Some of these even side deck heavy. This could be playing deck heavy. This card just loses it with a lot of Blackwing players and value players maining deck heavy and siding more. Like this deck just does not do well into deck heavy and oppression, and it's just kind of hard for you because you're trying to keep up while they have very much haymakers against you, while you're not maining haymakers against them. So it's just kind of hard. This is zombies. I think this deck is probably right here. I don't think very highly of this deck, but mainly because I play Quackmiro Drago deck mostly. But like this deck does very well. If we're counting on the best zombie player, which I think is actually beast mode, this deck is probably like up here, if not right over here. But like with the average zombie player, I think this deck is more down here. A lot of people are not playing it anymore, and the ones that are not usually putting up results. Unlike the said beast mode, who I think is extremely great at the game. I think he is one of the best players that we have seen in this format. But minus him, I just don't think the deck is all that well. It did have the time when Edison was first popping up where it was a very dominant deck. I think it was because a lot of people didn't know how to play against it. I don't think the deck is bad by any means, but I still think it is still a very good deck. But I just don't think the deck is insane. Now we have my deck. And I'm calling it my deck because I'm the inventor of it. Where do I think? Realistic. Probably right here. And I'm going to be real. Yes, I think this deck is great. If we're being unbiased, I'm totally right here. And this is probably going to be the thumbnail of the video where I have this deck as the best deck of the format, just because it'll get video views. But to be realistic with you, I think it is right here. I think the deck is very good. It's very strong. It definitely has its weak points. This match is almost unwinnable. I thought of citing triple prohibition just for this deck, and I'm not capping. I'm being 100% serious. This deck is very good. I think it's what takes the Disaster Dragons, but actually takes this to another level, is the fact that like Blizzard Dragon can out Spirit Reaper, because even if they bottomless it, and if the Spirit Reaper is face up and you Blizzard Dragon target it, it will be destroyed. I think this deck is very good. I think it's very consistent. The 6 draw cards very much help you dig through the deck more and allow that Burial to be even better, because this deck can't play Burial. So once you get rid of all triple Wyvern without returning them, you are out of all Wyverns, while this deck can play more Wyverns, which extra copies off the Burial. I think this deck is very strong, and it's just this deck, but more consistent. And then we have regular Lightsworn. Probably right there. Again, I think this is just a better Judgment Dragon deck. I think it's a better Fairy deck. I think this is just a better variant. But Lightsworn being able to just mill double Wolf is just very, very strong. And like, I don't see Lightsworn ever completely falling off into rogue status. People still play it. It doesn't get as many tops, so if we're going by the basis of not getting tops, it'd be somewhere down there. But you know, this is one of the other boogeymans of the format, because like you could just go against someone who you think is not a great player, and if they open Charge Light Brigade, recharge, mill a couple wolves, JDU turn 2, they can just win, and it doesn't matter how good they are, because like this deck can just punish good players just because it's like, I'm going to drop a 3k beater that nukes the board, and you don't have Starlight Road or Judgment, so you're going to just have to take it. and you just lose to it, and it happens. Like, I know of very good players who just go up against bad Lightsworn players, and they just lose to it, and it happens. But that happens in every matchup. But I feel like with this deck, it rewards worse players. If it's your day, it's your day. It's kind of like this deck, but this deck has a mid game comparatively to like, unless the high roll, like you can still with Instant Fusion, Brio, and like just play control game. While this deck kind of needs the high roll to really win events and top events. For these, um, I think any type of frog deck is probably around here. Just like any frog variant, like obviously all the other frog variants are up there, but like play frogs and you're probably going to do well. I can't see a frog deck doing well. And then any type of hero list is probably right there. Heroes are just a good archetype. It's going to do well. Miracle Ab-Zero is a very, very good boss monster. And I think that this card is above its pay grade when it comes to what was in this actual format. And I think it is very strong for this format. But yeah, that's my tier list. If you have any comments or concerns, please comment down below. This is my tier list as of right now, post YCS Niagara. If you think I am capping, please let me know. If you think that this deck is really bad, let me know in the comments. I'm not denying that the deck has its weaknesses. Every deck has its weakness. But you know, I think it deserves its place here. I think these are the three top decks. I still think the big three are the big three. If you think that this is how it should be, I'm not denying it. I think these are very easily interchangeable right now. And I do think that the three frog decks are the top three, three of the top five, but I think they're third, fourth, fifth right now. But if you think any differently, let me know down below, and we'll see you guys next time.